From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It was a big week in Washington, D.C. President Obama announced a sweeping nuclear deal with Iran, while the Senate passed an education bill that supporters say fixes the controversial No Child Left Behind Act. And out on the campaign trail, Hillary Clinton supporters are buzzing about rising support for Bernie Sanders. We tackle the major issues on the agenda in the nation's capital with our guest, U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, as always, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Senator, welcome back to the program. Really good to have you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Ted. Wonderful to be with you guys.
Glad to have you.
Let's start with Iran. This week, a deal was reached with Iran in an effort to curb their ability to obtain a nuclear weapon. Sanctions would be lifted. Of course, Congress has to approve it. Will you vote for or against President Obama's accord with Iran?
I'm not going to decide on that until I've read the entire agreement, which I have with me this weekend, and hear their briefing on it, which comes up on Wednesday.
Does anything give you pause from what you know now?
The hostile reaction gives me some pause, but there's
From
also
who?
a lot of politics in the hostile reaction from the Republican side.
Okay.
And it's hard to sort out what's on the up and up and what's just politics. You know, this is something Obama did, therefore we must hate it. And so sorting through that, I think, really means I've got to look hard at the merits, and I really want to allow the administration the chance to make its case and to answer my questions. And all that happens in the coming week.
The hostile reaction isn't just political, though. Of course, there's some international hostile reaction, real concern that this would lead to an influx of cash for Iran, and that would be filtered to terrorism groups. So a lot of concern there for Israel. You know, is that something that's on your radar screen as well?
Very much. Very much. Unfortunately, there's some politics there as well, given what's transpired between the Prime Minister and our President. So again, how much of that needs to be taken at face value is an open question. I think it really is important to look at the substance of it and let the administration make its case and understand that this is not an endpoint. We do not sign the agreement and walk away. Iran is going to continue to be a problem, and they are going to continue to be untrustworthy into the indefinite future. And so we have to continue with all of our resources to keep an eye on them, to keep after them, to keep putting pressure on them. But I do think that there's a credible outlet in which they come back into the realm of civilized and constructive nations. And keeping that door open, I think, is an important goal. And I've also been struck a little bit by the recent letter from the 100 ambassadors who said that this was a good effort by the administration, particularly people like Nick Burns and Tom Pickering, and most particularly Ryan Crocker, who was an absolutely heroic ambassador in Afghanistan, first guy in, you know, cooking in ammo tins and, you know, using a sat phone when there were no communications. Then in Iraq, he was a very little guy, watching him and General Odierno, who was about 3 feet taller than him, work together, and the respect that Odierno had for him. He's kind of a hero of the Foreign Service. So there's some really important voices that are saying that this is something we should be doing. So I'll make my own decision in the next couple of weeks.
You're a liberal Democrat. You were elected in 2006 against the Iraq War. It's hard for a lot of us to imagine you would join with the most hawkish Republicans to give a huge diplomatic defeat to your president. I mean, is that really a possibility for you to vote no?
I want to take a solid look at it. You know, it's possible that this deal is a mistake, and it's possible that there are ways in which the Iranians can cheat in such a way that it will destabilize the Middle East further, like it's not destabilized enough already. And so I'm giving it an honest look. Clearly, I'd like to support the president if the deal is as good as it is. Clearly, when you've got that kind of support from the diplomatic community, from Bush administration officials, as well as Clinton and Obama administration officials, there's something to be said for it, but I'm going to hold my powder until I've heard them out.
And from the other side of the argument, I mean, the president was pretty clear in his press conference. He said he doesn't see an alternative to this other than potentially going to war with Iran. Is that how you view it, too, that it's this or something pretty catastrophic?
If we don't do this, it's hard to see what transpires. Perhaps you can put all the countries back together again. the administration says, and it makes sense to believe, that the only way you put Russia, China, UK, Germany, France, and us back together again is if they believe that the wrongdoer in this episode was Iran. If they think we're the ones who've behaved irresponsibly, they're not going to go back and help us renegotiate a better deal. And so that's the great unknown. On our own, the United States can simply not negotiate as hard a deal as we can when it's the world cutting off Iran. And that was the great achievement of Secretary Clinton, and then that Secretary Kerry followed through on to get that group. I mean, we were working with Vladimir Putin on this. Think about that. Mm-hmm. Look at what we're doing in Ukraine against each other, in Syria against each other. And yet on this, they've been able to hold that group together.
Last question on this topic, Senator. Part of this is, I suppose, a test of the president's ability to work with Congress. And Ted and I remember well the last time you were on this program, you expressed frustration with the president for his lack of communication with Congress. Has it gotten better?
It's still not great. But I do think they're trying. It's just never been their way of doing business.
It sounds like it never will be.
I mean, you know, time's running out, and maybe they'll change dramatically in the last, year and a half. But I think we've kind of reached the equilibrium where they're doing about as much as they care to do in terms of reaching out to Congress. There are issues where they reach out a lot. I have a really good, close relationship with them on some things, but it's a constant refrain that you hear from people on our side.
Do you think Secretary Clinton, if she were to be the next president, or even the nominee, and then the president, I should say, do you think she'd do a better job on that? Do you think she sees that differently than President Obama has?
Yeah, I think she would. First of all, she has this incredible ally in former President Bill Clinton, who is sort of relentlessly gregarious, and I think she herself is very outgoing, and she came to visit us just this week, and it was a real love fest, and it was, I think she'll work very well with the Democrats in Congress.
What was her message speaking to the Senate Democrats this week?
She spoke very favorably about the Iran deal, and then took questions, and so whatever anybody wanted to raise, she responded to, and she was terrific.
Did you have any
taking them off the cuff? No.
You didn't have any?
No, I was too low down the list, and she had too little time, and she was giving pretty thorough answers.
Perils of being a junior
senator. Didn't get to me, exactly. Didn't even get to Jack.
I want to talk to you about highway funding. I'm sure you have a lot to say about the federal side, but I really want you to weigh in on something that's happening on the state level first. The state wants to toll large commercial trucks to repair crumbling infrastructure. Look, you drive on our roads and bridges all the time. You took a bridge to get over here to our studios in East Providence. Do you support this plan?
I don't know about the exact plan. I support the idea that the state needs to produce more funding for roads, bridges, and highways.
Well, who isn't going to support that?
We did it in the bill originally. In the budget originally under Governor Chafee. That was a big step. That was a real accomplishment by Governor Chafee. Now Governor Raimondo has proposed this form of tolling. There's going to be an agreement of some kind reached on this between her and the Speaker and the Senate President. I don't need to get into the middle of that as long as there is a deal, and I think there will be. I think it's important for Rhode Island to be contributing to its own roads and bridges as well. And on the federal side, we have some really good news, which is that with a unified, powerful message, with the countdown towards the end of the federal highway program, the Democrats basically caused Mitch McConnell to blink. And he announced this week that he will do a 6-year highway bill. Exactly what we wanted, exactly what we got through, bipartisan, the Environment Public Works Committee.
And it means what for Rhode Island?
It means an increase in funding, 6%, 2%, and 2% over the first 3 years. And it means that the DOT director can say, okay, I got 6 years of funding that I know is locked in, so I can start looking at some of the big projects. We've been doing it month to month to month to month. You can't let a big contract if you don't know where your funding source is going to be more than 6 months out, for instance. So it's going to be a really big deal for Director Alviti and for the DOT to have this done. Now, this is the weekend that it's going to be solved or broken, I think. I've been told to keep my phone on by Chairman Boxer as she negotiates with Leader McConnell. But I'm very, very optimistic that they're basically cornered into agreeing that they have to do a 6-year bill.
Okay. I think she's ranking member boxer now, unfortunately for you and your fellow Democrats. But
Thank you for that painful
old
correction.
habits die hard. One other question actually on transportation, which is we've been looking at a lot of these statistics as the debates happened here in the state, and Rhode Island, it seems, relies much more heavily than most states on the federal highway funding to do all our projects.
We do.
It's like 60+%, I believe, comes out of the federal government. Other states put much more of their own resources in. Does that hurt Rhode Island at all in terms of attracting federal funding, or is it just up to us? If we don't want to contribute a lot of local money, it doesn't matter?
It's basically up to us, but it really has had an impact on our roads and highways, because the 60% of the federal money that goes into highways is 60% because there's 40% that goes to pay loans on advances that we've taken against future federal funds. Mm-hmm. We're basically 100%, other than the Chafee money and the Raimondo, whatever it's going to be, Mattiello agreement money, we're basically 100% Fed-funded state. It's just that nearly half of it has to go to paying the debt on the stuff that we borrowed from future federal payments. So we've gotten ourselves in a box, and I think that having some revenue to pay that down and perhaps refinance that debt is all going to be to the good.
Our guest this week is U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator, 22 million federal employees, contractors, and those seeking security clearance from the federal government and their families had their information stolen in a hack of the Office of Personnel Management. We have a lot of defense contractors here in Rhode Island. I'm wondering if your office is dealing with any of this. Have they been contacted? What do you know about it?
From a constituent services point of view, we haven't had any contacts that I'm aware of. From a policy point of view, this is obviously a huge reminder to all of us of how significant the cyber threat is. I was just asked to co-chair the Center for Strategic and International Studies report on cyber to the next president, along with Chairman McCall from the House side, who's the chairman of Homeland Security there. We have a very keen interest in cyber issues. And Rhode Island is well represented on that because Jim Langevin is really one of the experts on the House side in that issue, and chaired the last report 8 years ago, which still stands up very well. He did wonderful work, and I hope to model on that. But we really need to pay attention to this, and with any luck, we'll get to a cyber bill either at the last minute before the August recess or upon our return.
You know, we have to go to a break soon, but from reading the reporting on this issue, one of the problems that I'm gathering on this is the government's computer systems are laughably out of date and therefore susceptible to attack. But I don't seem to hear a lot of members of Congress pounding the podium to spend more money to fix this problem.
Well, you've got to divide civilian from military. The military systems, I think, are very well secured. A lot of effort has gone into securing .mil. .gov, not so much. And when you have agencies who have had to live through sequestration, who've had to lay off and furlough workers, who are facing relentless budget attacks by Republicans to say, okay, let's spend a whole bunch of money on tuning up our cyber protections, it's a tough ask. And frankly, it's one of the prices of the austerity campaign that the Republicans have run.
We're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. Our guest this week is U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Ted?
Senator, you worked on the big new federal education bill the Senate passed just this week. It's to replace No Child Left Behind. A lot in it, but it gives states more leeway. That's been a theme from all of you. I did notice your colleague across the border, Elizabeth Warren, voted against the final bill Thursday. She said, quote, Republicans have blocked every attempt to establish even minimum safeguards to ensure that money would be used effectively. How do you respond to Senator Warren's concerns on that?
I'm much more optimistic about how states will use the authorities that they have than she is, which is why I've worked closely along this bill from committee right through passage. I think I have 8 different provisions in the bill that I crafted or co-crafted with another senator, and I'm very optimistic about it. I think that the accountability concerns are ones that we need to keep an eye on. We have seen situations in which kids who were African American, kids for whom English was a second language, kids who had disabilities were allowed to fail in school because nobody was keeping track. And so keeping track is an important goal. On the other hand, we had a system in which schools were being judged based on tests of the students, which the students didn't get graded on. So the schools had to put immense pressure on the students to perform well on the test to protect the school. And that dynamic is what we needed to unwind, because the effect that was having in the classroom was squeezing out art, squeezing out music, squeezing out history, squeezing out civics, and restricting the curriculum to the stuff that's on the test, which the school needed to do in a spirit or instinct for self-preservation. And that was having a really lousy effect on the classroom. And the drill tests to prepare kids for the real tests and the whole, I mean, it was a nightmare. So we're rid of that at last, and I hope that we can get the bill through, get a good support from the House for a very similar bill when we go to conference, get the president signing it, and get that burden off of our schools by the time kids go back this fall.
You said in your statement about the bill it will, quote, get rid of high-stakes testing. So does that mean the round students won't have to even take the PARCC exam anymore?
They may still have to take the PARCC exam, but it would be part of a suite of measures, what I call a dashboard, that the state can put together to measure how a school is doing. It could include how many kids take AP classes, how many kids take SATs and go on to college. Could be a whole variety of elements. And I think we'll learn from different states trying different things what the best elements are. What we won't have is this business where, in order to show that the kids can succeed on the PARCC test, they have to take the pre-test and the pre-test, and days spent gearing them up for the test, and school rallies putting pressure on them to do well. That nonsense can all fall off, and the PARCC test can just become one day of testing in a larger matrix of signals about how well the school and how well the kids are doing.
So that metric of measuring would be measuring how well a school's doing, but what about the students? Do you think the PARCC exam should be a graduation requirement?
We left a little bit of room for states to come up with the best ways for tracking individual student progress.
You're a dad, though. Kids that went through school, do you think it should be?
I don't.
No?
I don't.
How come?
I think there are lots of ways to track student progress. I've taken both of the PARCC tests, both the English test and the math test.
How'd you do?
I did all right, but I mean, I was really taking them to see how it felt to test them. Did it seem like this was really the be-all and the end-all? And no. And there are kids who are maybe not going to do well on the PARCC test, but they're amazing when it comes to music, or they're fascinated by history and can write beautifully. Things like that need to be part of the measure of success. There are too many kids for whom the test is becoming too important of a measure, and it doesn't reflect the whole talent capacity of a child.
We're going to start asking all the politicians to release their PARCC scores with their tax returns annually. I want to turn to something a little more fun, which is politics. As I'm sure you've seen your colleague Bernie Sanders drawing very large crowds to his presidential rallies. You've been on the record as a Hillary Clinton supporter for a long time. You were just praising her once again. So make your case. Why should primary voters support Hillary over Bernie?
Well, Hillary can and will win. So that's a very important consideration to open with. She also has an immense breadth of experience that Bernie Sanders simply doesn't share, having been Secretary of State, having dealt with all the foreign policy and national security issues that a president has to face. That all said, Bernie is having a wonderful time. And he is drawing really big crowds, and he's a really authentic voice. And I think it's a great reminder to the voters that, you know, there's a lot in the economic system that really is rigged against middle class and regular folks, and Bernie's very articulate about getting that message across, and its resonance, I think, will help whoever the Democratic candidate ends up being. So as a Hillary supporter, I welcome Bernie's activities. I think it's enlivening the debate, it's adding a really authentic voice, and I think it's good for us. So I'm thrilled. He is not our Donald Trump.
Environmentalists, though, criticize Hillary Clinton a little bit that she hasn't been strong enough on climate change, and this is a big issue for you, that she's trying to to walk that tightrope between environmentalists, climate change, and the coal industry.
Yeah.
We heard a lot about that this week. Do you share that disappointment?
I don't. I think that when I've heard her, we spoke at the same event in New York from the same podium, and her remarks on climate change were terrific. I think she's absolutely committed to it. She totally gets it. She also sees, I think, that in order to get something big and successful done on climate change, it would help to be able to have the coal industry calmed down a little bit. And because they're going to take a beating anyway, as renewable prices go down, 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 and coal doesn't, they're very frightened. And her pitch to us in the meeting that we just had last week was that she really wants to make sure that she's reaching out to those coal states to let them know that she will work with every fiber in her body to try to protect their economies. If it's not going to be coal, it's got to be something. But if you're doing a big climate fee, for instance, the way my bill works, you have a lot of revenue. And with that revenue, you can do a lot for a state like West Virginia or a state like Wyoming to help them through that transition so they don't have to be so scared of it.
Are they coming around at all to that? Are you getting any support from Republicans on your carbon tax bill?
I've had Republican senators say, I want to be with you on that, stay with it, I'll be with you, but I can't be there yet.
Why?
They're terrified because of the Citizens United money. Citizens United was that Supreme Court decision that let unlimited corporate money come into elections, and what's happened is that the fossil fuel industry has taken full advantage, not just in spending money on elections, but also, obviously, if you're allowed to do something, you're allowed to threaten to do that same thing. And they're telling the Republicans, step out of line and you'll be punished, to use the exact phrase they used, at a severe disadvantage. That from a group that said they were going to spend nearly $900 million in this election. So in one group that's going to spend $900 million in the election says, cross us and you'll be severely disadvantaged, that makes these guys pretty nervous about how they can escape from the trap that they're in. But a solid third, or perhaps even more, of the Republicans in the Senate want out and do not like the position that they're in. But trying to help them get out is like trying to organize a jailbreak.
Well, you caused quite a stir along the same lines a few months ago with a Washington Post op-ed.
Yep.
You suggested climate change skeptics could be prosecuted for peddling false information along the lines of what happened with the tobacco industry over lung cancer. The Providence Journal, among others, has said it fears the kind of thing you're talking about could interfere with the First Amendment and free speech rights. How do you respond?
Nobody has a First Amendment free speech right to commit fraud. And that's exactly what the tobacco companies were doing. They knew that one thing was true about their product, i.e. it was dangerous to humans, and they had a deliberate campaign to convince people of the opposite. At the core of all the skepticism, I believe, there is a group of folks who know what carbon pollution will do to our atmosphere, has done to our atmosphere, will do to our oceans, has done to our oceans, and is deliberately, fraudulently trying to create a counter-narrative that they know better than to be true. So if that's the case, that's not free speech. That's now fraud in the exact same way that the tobacco narrative was. And the Department of Justice brought not a criminal action, so it's not prosecuting, but they brought a civil action to force them to stop lying and to tell the truth about their product.
Do you want DOJ to do that now?
that could be done.
Should they do it now?
I hope that they will, but it is not my call, and it's one of those areas where you just got to be very careful about trying to interfere overly in what is a law enforcement decision by the Department of Justice.
We have less.
I say it publicly, and I think at the it's not everybody who is a climate skeptic should go to prison.
Because that is what people think you're saying. That throw all the scientists. I know most of them don't, but there are scientists.
That's the hysterical reaction from the people who don't want this question raised. But at the very heart of this, were there people, including some of the same individuals who were involved in the tobacco scam, were there people who knew what they were saying wasn't true, who were saying things that they knew weren't true, and were saying things with the intent to defraud people, to fool people?
We have less than a minute left.
Question worth asking.
And I have to tackle this question. So very briefly, 24-year-old Kuwait-born gunman attacked 2 military facilities Thursday in Chattanooga and killed 4 Marines. We're taping this on a Friday.
Yep.
A lot could happen.
Yep.
Many people are watching this on a Sunday.
Yep.
Look, it seems like we have some homegrown terrorists here. You know, allegedly a man in work committed some acts, being prosecuted, and in Boston. Is this a growing threat or a bad stretch here in less than 30 seconds?
We've had serious homegrown terrorism since Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma building. What we're concerned about now is the internet outreach by ISIL particularly to try to encourage Americans who are interested in their propaganda to take small, direct, violent acts. And if it turns out that this guy was responding to that, we've got a real problem to pursue.
We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.